Well, the main reasons behind the conflict in the Middle East has historically been the so-called Arab-Israeli conflict. That is the Israeli occupation of Palestine and the Israeli occupation of various parts of the Arab world, including Lebanon, the Golan Heights of Syria, and so on. That type of territorial conquest has set the ground for perpetual conflict. Without settling these major issues, of course, the conflict will not come to an end. But of course, over the years, that conflict manifested itself in many different ways, and it became so complex and so convoluted that is now leading to sub-conflicts that are taking on sectarian, ideological, and religious nature. But the bottom line is the conflict is situated in a purely territorial conquest starting in 1948 and forward. Well, of course, I mean, the United States would not be involved in the Middle East if it were not for three major components. One of them is oil. Oil is a major source of energy that is fueling the world economy. And all the talks about alternative fuels and such haven't yet morphed to anything comparable to the importance and the strategic and economic importance of oil, and now as of in the last 2 decades of natural gas. So this is very essential to American foreign policy, and I think it's the heart of American foreign policy paradigm. Two other important factors. One is Israel. Israel has always been paramount as far as American foreign policy in the Middle East is concerned. And by paramount, I mean it has been an essential component in how foreign policy is formulated. Is this good for Israel? Is this bad for Israel? As a result, there has been this intrinsic link between Israel and US behavior in the Arab region. And of course, we can talk about why is this the case, the power of the Israeli lobby in Washington, and so forth and so on. But this is definitely a major component. The third is that the strategic location of the Middle East region, not just because of its economic resources, but it's also because of its geopolitical importance at the heart of the so-called old world. That's where great games have been fought in the past. They are constantly trying to stave off Russian, Chinese, Indian, and other sorts of influences coming from Asia. To control this area politically, economically, geopolitically, economically, and strategically, it's a huge benefit to the United States, and it will always remain at the heart of US foreign policy until it is eventually forced to move out. I do not know. I mean, the classification of the First, Second, and Third World War might not exactly be pertinent in this context. I think what matters is conflict, as opposed to the very definition of that conflict. What is really underway is a war that is happening in Proxy in Syria right now that involves various regional players and various international players. It's not just a cold war, it's a real war in the sense that all these parties are involved in funding, arming, and in some instances even participating in that war. At this stage, I think there might not be enough interest to turn that into a much larger war that involves a larger physical space. I think it's achieving its benefits as far as the various countries are concerned. It's consuming and destroying Syria. It had quashed any hopes that the so-called Arab Spring is going to lead to anything that is beneficial and that would eventually challenge American hegemony in the Middle East. As long as this conflict is continuing, as long as America's role in the Middle East is safe for now, the danger for them is how much can they actually control conflict. We know that conflict cannot always be perfectly controlled. It's not that sort of experiment that you do in laboratory. It's happening at a regional level, and it could break out any time, at any given moment, whether in Lebanon or even in Jordan. It's happening in Iraq and it might happen in Egypt. If we reach that point, it means that the political components of that conflict are no longer predictable. And if they are not predictable, then the US might find itself facing some very tough options. One of them is to get physically involved in that war the same way they got involved in Libya. It's rather a very tricky question because we are not dealing with a win-win situation. The conflict is going to taint and scar anybody involved in it, regardless of where they are standing in terms of this paradigm. That said, direct and total involvement in that conflict can be the worst case scenario for anybody involved. The Russian Federation has been involved in that conflict in terms of their support of the Damascus regime, their military support as well. But their position has also been clear that we are seeking a political solution to that conflict. And that was a very early on statement that was made by Moscow in the beginning of that conflict, and they remain consistent in that demand. Compare that to the position of the United States, of Britain, of France, and their regional collaborators and allies, where they have been very inconsistent. On one hand, they speak of political solution, and at the same conference, they declare total military support, sending billions of dollars of arms, channeling fighters coming from all over the world to take part in that war. So they have been very inconsistent, and that inconsistency, in my opinion, that is sending mixed messages, and that the mixed messages are really what is helping this conflict to perpetuate. So the best that Russia can do at this point is consistency in their political stance, to stand in total support of political dialogue, not in rhetoric, but in actual action, to try as much as possible to stand in a middle ground between all the parties, and to eventually prevail in terms of being the ones who have been morally consistent, politically consistent from the beginning, so that a political dialogue and solution can be achieved at one point.